Sorry. It has been far too long between drinks. I am absolutely buried in work, and so expect this video to be way jankier than usual. Even the slides might not be in the correct order. The full Federal Court of Australia has today just handed down its decision in the Minister for the Environment and Sharma. This was an appeal from last year's decision in Sharma and the Minister for the Environment, in which Justice Bromberg found that there was a duty of care owed by the Minister to children generally when making decisions under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act of 1999. The full court found that Justice Bromberg got the law wrong. Today's decision is complex. People see this as a bit of a failure of the legal system to acknowledge the real threat of climate change. Other people have seen this as a return to common sense in favour of the mining industry. Now, Justice Bromberg is a very good judge. Some of my favourite decisions have been written by him. And even I must admit to being surprised by last year's decision, and it's worth explaining why. There's sort of a bigger point at play here, and it's what role do we want courts to play in policy making and decision making? So, quickly glance at the United States and its Supreme Court. It's a really big deal in the US who gets on the court because SCOTUS plays an active role in policy making and decision making. For example, access to family planning services literally depends upon who is on the court. Now, we don't tend to have this problem in Australia. Famously, the main concern of the Commonwealth when appointing justices to the High Court is the court will agree with the Commonwealth over the states. We really like judges who like the expansion of Commonwealth power. And so this should be the focus of your thoughts through this case. If a minister makes a decision that you don't like, what role should the court play? Conversely, if a minister makes a decision that you do like, should those absolute jerks whom you hate be able to get the court to overturn that decision? Let's turn to Justice Bromberg's decision from last year. And here it is. Whether a novel duty of care exists is to be ascertained by reference to a multi-factorial assessment in which considerations, salient features, relevant to the appropriateness of imputing a legal duty upon the putative tortleasor are assessed and weighed. Holy Jesus, that is difficult to understand. Now, novel here means the same as in novel coronavirus. It means new. Why were we talking about novel duties of care? Well, because the court was being asked if the common law, one of the bodies of law that applies beyond statute, recognises that the minister owes a duty of care to children generally, despite no court previously finding that this duty of care exists. Is that weird? Very famously, it has appeared before in a case called Donoghue and Stevenson, the snail in a bottle case. Mrs. Donoghue buys a bottle of ginger beer, she drinks it, and in it she finds a decomposing snail. Now she wants to sue the manufacturer, Mr. Stevenson. Now at that point of time, she was shit out of luck. The court had never found that there was a cause of action for the end consumer of a product to sue the manufacturer outside of contract law. But the court says, well, hang on a second. I've looked in the magic cave of common law relics, and it turns out that you must take reasonable care to avoid acts or omissions which you can reasonably foresee would be likely to injure your neighbour. And thus the law of negligence was born. And so Sharma, who is a teenager, is asking the court, please look in the magic cave of common law and see if there is anything in there that looks like a duty of care by a minister to children. And Justice Bromberg looked in the cave and found that there was something that looked like a duty of care by a minister to children, but there wasn't a remedy available to the applicants of that case, and so the children lost the case. Now, even though the minister won, the minister appeals the decision, arguing that Justice Bromberg had got the law wrong. There was no duty of care by a minister to children when exercising the power under this act. And the full federal court says, hang on, this duty that Justice Bromberg found in the Cave of Common Law is actually a policy question that should be handled by the minister and not by courts. If you don't like the decision of the minister, you run a campaign and vote out the government. Further, there are a bunch of technical reasons why this case is a problem. Not least, remember this snail from before? Well, the kids haven't drunk the snail-ridden ginger beer yet, and so the cause of action hasn't arisen for the duty of care to have been breached. All right, let's slow that one right down. You get to sue in negligence if you have been harmed. Willy Wonka here turned me blue, and I get to sue him for turning me blue. That's the harm. This also applies to the government. If the government does me an injury, I can sue the government. But here we have a ministerial decision, but I haven't sustained an injury yet. The minister might have made a decision to turn me blue, but until I turn blue, I haven't been injured, and so I don't have a cause of action. And the careful bit there is, even if I have been harmed, I still need to be able to demonstrate that there's a duty of care that was supposed to have been exercised, right? So we're all good. Now we turn to the next step. The applicants in the original case were suing because they wanted the court to issue them relief to prevent the harm, right? Injunctive relief. And this is a problem for the full court. Without the completed tort, I've lost my point. Without the completed tort, the court struggled to see the novel duty of care that had been breached because it hasn't yet been breached. That's hard to digest. But it's one of the reasons why sensible people found last year's decision a bit weird. Not only did the applicants want the recognition of the novel duty of care, they wanted it recognised ahead of it being breached. And the full court says, yeah, nah. Final point. The full court also says that the analysis is the wrong way around. Justice Bromberg found that there was a duty of care first and then tried to apply the act. If you think that a duty of care arises from a piece of legislation, the starting point is the legislation to work out the scope of the duty of care. So this is just another technical point about how we interpret legislation. So now you understand in broad strokes that this decision is fairly complex. You can still be annoyed about it. Remember the big question that I posed right back at the start? Well, it's one thing to be a conservative, black-letter legal researcher about these things. It doesn't necessarily mean that this perspective is correct. We might reasonably say, hang on, we should expect the court to have a hand on the shoulder of the minister when making decisions, especially when they have potentially catastrophic environmental outcomes. Just because you're not correct doesn't mean you're being unreasonable in thinking that the courts should step in. And further, you can reasonably think, yes, I do want the courts to step in when it suits me, and I don't want it to step in when it doesn't. Nothing stops that intuition. But the starting point really should be getting your head around the actual legal issues first. We can both understand the decision in broad strokes and be disappointed by it. And that is it for this. Sorry that it was so slapdash. I have, of course, ironed out a whole lot of complexity in order to give the case in broad strokes, but now you've basically got the gist. Follow me on the Twitter at Legal Reckoning. My notes are terrible here. Twitter at Legal Reckoning. Like and subscribe and whatnot. Good luck.